of regular folks in Kentucky, and that we think our Commonwealth is worth fighting for. So now it's time to check in with our co-host. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what does your protest sign say today? You there on the internet watching live or recorded or wherever, listening from your car on a podcast, go ahead and shout what your sign says. So I'm Aaron. I'm from Lexington, the lovely beige sea of Childsburg. My sign says today, our Commonwealth is no place for hate. And Doug, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Doug Price from Harrison County, Kentucky. I'm using the same sign, other than wearing my T-shirt that our trans grandchild gave to us. My sign says, "Be woke, don't be unconscious."
So, Doug, I just want to check in because I feel like we have, we've been covering this session since it started. They have been laser focused on, taking away trans rights, otherizing trans kids. And to your credit, you are an amazing grandfather. You're standing up for your grandkid each and every week. I just want to check in and make sure. Are you washing the shirt, Doug, or is it because it's been worn an awful lot?
The shirt is washed frequently.
All right. I see it a lot, which I love. I'll be honest. I only ever see you on this show. So I don't come to Harrisonburg, check into Harrison County to check in what you're wearing. But from my mental image of you, Doug, you just wear that shirt.
It's a good shirt. That's all I can say.
It is an awesome shirt for sure. It is an awesome shirt. And we all know you are a proud grandfather. Pops? Is that what they call you?
They call me Pops.
Pops. I want to see a sign. I want to see a sign at the rallies or as we fight SB 150, which we will talk about how we can do that later. Proud Pops. You got to just own that, right? Because it's awesome, absolutely awesome. Cool. You've got it. You've got skin in this game for sure. All right, so let's check in. We have another co-host, as we tend to like to have a few folks here. And this week, very excited to have with us Chris Priest. Chris, how are you?
Doing pretty good. All things over here in Berea are pretty nice. And my protest sign for the week is "Stop the Culture War."
Awesome. That's awesome. I love your background, Chris. I just feel like we're chatting with a superhero, which is fantastic. And honestly, anyone who chooses to engage in the political landscape in Kentucky, for progressive values, I feel like you are a superhero. You're an underdog, surely, but a superhero.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Captain America, and part of, why I have stood up to do the things I do is because of the values of superheroes that have been instilled in me since I've started reading comics as a kid.
Yeah, and there's no better model for punching Nazis than Captain America.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right, so let's check in with the stories, news of the week. We've got Doug doing a legislative update because, again, as we mentioned, the legislature has been out on their veto break. And they will be until next, I believe it's Wednesday, right? So Wednesday and Thursday, their final 2 days. But what's brewing right now? Let's get that rundown from Doug.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. I'm really only going to be talking about one bill tonight, but there is a lot of exciting stuff going on. We're going to be back in Frankfort a week from today for the teen rally, a rally led by and for teens against the horrible SB 150 bill. And we'll give you more information on that a little bit later. As a reminder, House Bill 470 had been described as an anti-trans measure. Senator Danny Carroll, seemingly on the verge of tears, had proposed a watered-down version of the bill in a committee meeting. These changes were reviewed by the House, and ultimately the bill was laid on the table. Along the way, former state representative Jerry Miller testified that he had a grandchild who identifies as transgender, and he spoke against any anti-transgender legislation in honor of his granddaughter. And suddenly, out of nowhere, Representative David Meade and Senator Max Wise arranged a hastily called House Education Committee meeting where the contents of HB 470 and another bill were added to
really
SB
excited to have with us for this week's
and it passed out of committee, and within 30 minutes on the House floor, and there was passionate debate from the Democratic representatives that followed, coupled with procedural moves trying to slow down this warp speed process. After a couple of hours, the bill was passed in the House by a 75 to 22 vote, followed by a round of debate in the Senate, and the bill was passed from that chamber by a 30 to 7 vote. During the debate in both chambers, there was discussion about the process obliterating the state's open meetings law, which requires a 24-hour notice before public meetings. The Republican answer, nothing. When you have nothing to say, you say nothing. When you know you've been caught, you say nothing. What will they say when the matter is litigated? Nothing? We found out a couple days ago that an individual from Robert Stiver's hometown has filed a lawsuit alleging the violation of the open meetings law. The ACLU is also considering filing a lawsuit, and a well-known Frankfort attorney is looking for a litigant. As I understand the law, the suit can be filed in Frankfort Circuit Court as long as the litigant is a resident of Franklin County. I want to talk a little bit now about what is in this new combined, fully atrocious bill. Most of this commentary is from Olivia Croft of the Louisville Courier-Journal. SB 150's initial provisions remain, including the one allowing teachers to misgender their students, and a requirement that schools give parents 2 weeks' notice before any lessons on human sexuality and allow them to opt out. Other provisions now include a ban on gender-affirming medical care for trans use. Think about that. The legislators are telling parents they will make medical decisions for their children. A requirement that doctors set a timeline to detransition children already taking puberty blockers or undergoing hormone therapy. They would be allowed to continue offering care as they taper a child's treatments if immediately taking them off the treatment could harm the child. They didn't consult any physicians on this stuff, except for a couple who were out of the state, California and someplace else. Another one was schools would not be allowed to discuss sexual orientation or gender identity with students of any age. Schools would not be allowed to talk about sexually transmitted diseases or human sexuality before 6th grade and would need to require parental consent in 6th grade and up. School districts would be required to craft bathroom policies that at a minimum would not allow trans kids to use the bathroom tied to their gender identities. Ultimately, the bill was sent to Governor Beshear for him to sign the bill or allow the bill to become law without his signature, or most likely veto the bill. If the latter happens on March the 29th or the 30th, the expectation is the House and Senate will override the governor's veto. In the meantime, all of us, y'all means all who care about our liberties, absolutely need to speak up. Call your legislators, send emails, picket their places of business, call them out in their churches, whatever it takes to do the Ronald Reagan thing, tear up this bill. My question would be to the God-fearing, righteous wing of the Kentucky Republican Party, will your God meet you at the pearly gates and tell you, nope, you don't qualify. You don't get to choose which of my children you approve of or those you ignore. So this gate is not open for you to enter. That's my report. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks so much, Doug. I want to apologize for the disruption to your report that I put in there inadvertently when I accidentally played a video. But I think this has taken up so much time and energy because it is so terribly, horribly awful, right? So we've covered it week after week after week. There's been ins and outs. There's been, opportunities. There've been setbacks. As you pointed out, it's been a circuitous process. And here we are, right? I'm nervous, and we'll hear from Keturah Herron later, Representative Herron later. It's very clearly though that like this is horrific. Thinking people hate it. 71% of Kentucky voters think it's a bad idea. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they all oppose this type of effort. It's this omnibus package of just horrific intrusions to other, the LGBTQ plus community, and we can't stand for it, right? It is. I appreciate the passion that you share, that Representative, Miller shared. I also want to just acknowledge, that what our friend Nate said in the comments, like you shouldn't have to have a trans human in your life that you care about to see that this is horrible, right? Just read the studies and know that these vulnerable kids are going to be even more vulnerable if this policy becomes the law of Kentucky, which, I just want to say, like, I don't know what the governor's going to do. And I desperately hope that he vetoes it. And we'll get to our call to action later about some things folks can do to help, impress upon him and these legislators who, had seemed to realize they went too far in the Senate at some level. But then totally changed their mind and went back on what they'd done previously. So I don't know. It's horrible. We've got a lot to do. I don't know, Chris, any thoughts you want to share about this specific issue before we kind of move to the next story?
Yeah, I just would like to point to kind of the hypocrisy of it all when it comes to the typical Republican narrative of just leave me alone, and I can do my own thing, and as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, I should be good. And don't make any laws that restrict my freedom in that way. And they're literally doing that here. They're literally telling parents how to parent, which is and going against medical advice from our nation, and also trying to govern specific people of how we live. And this is a part of their playbook. They continuously do this over and over and over. For a long time, it was Black people. Then they pivoted to immigrants, and they still hammer the immigrant argument. So we got all that border wall stuff, and they're having to increasingly pivot to smaller and smaller populations within our population. And so now unfortunately, trans kids have become the target, and they want to hammer this and keep pushing this culture war for other means. So, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah. I mean, but without their culture war, what do they got, right? There's just a bunch of horrible economic policies that don't help people out either. So, yeah. All right. So, speaking of horrible policies that don't help people out, I wanted to touch base quickly on whether or not Cole got every single thing they wanted during this legislative session. And I think they probably did. If folks recall, a few weeks back, we had Lane Boldman on the show. She is the executive director of the Kentucky Conservation Committee, and they do really important work of tracking environmental bills in the legislature. And I just wanted to say that coal is not actually a huge part of our economy anymore, right? It's culturally very important, but bourbon and automotive manufacturing far and away more important economically to Kentucky. But I think culturally it is critically important for lawmakers. And they still definitely take lots of money from coal companies, even though they're not as big as they once were. None of them are unionized in Kentucky anymore. That's another point to keep in mind. But there's still some money to be made. There's still political influence that is bought. And if you look at what has happened in this legislative session, it is like super clear that their agenda has been unchallenged. So specifically, we talked about SB 26. So this is, changing regulations about receiving waters and pollution, and is basically written for the coal industry to be able to kill the Kentucky arrow darter, right? So the Kentucky arrow darter is an endangered species. It's a riverine fish species, and this bill, as Lane mentioned, would kind of relax protections for waterways, specifically those which protect kind of last habitat for these endangered species, and the beneficiaries are the coal industry, who are going to be able to kind of ratchet up their pollution levels, and there's only one entity that's asking for that, right? And so it's not the Kentucky arrow darter and the biologists that study them. But, if we're willing to kind of sacrifice this one species to let coal kind of get its way, save them a little bit in their treatment plans and the resources it takes to run a clean operation in Kentucky, it's like, where else are we going to let them cut corners? Which obviously, in the past, we've done a lot to allow for more kind of black lung, because we have not forced them to, follow critical safety guidelines, or have ratcheted back those safety guidelines, or not given enough inspectors to make sure that they're actually following those safety guidelines. So, the Kentucky arrow darter, the canary in the coal mine, or in the arrow darter in the coal slurry, I don't know, but just very depressing that these legislators were willing to kind of rubber stamp what the coal industry wanted. We will watch SB 26 in terms of being whether it's signed into law, but it, at this point, has passed and will be is on the governor's desk. All right, and the other one, which I found super annoying, was Senate Bill 4, which again Lane had mentioned. It was in process, and we were urging folks to put in phone calls against it. But this is to keep coal-fired power plants online, keep that pollution churning, even if utilities know it's cheaper for ratepayers to switch to lower carbon fuel sources. And that's the kind of galling thing. It's like, I guess there is that kind of cultural importance of coal getting their way, because the utilities, which are bigger companies and actually have a more direct tie to more humans in Kentucky, right? Because we're all ratepayers. The utilities are saying, no, actually, it's cheaper for us to retire some of these old plants, as it takes more and more maintenance to keep them online. And it would be cheaper for us to switch to solar, cheaper for us to switch to natural gas, which natural gas is, like not great, but solar obviously very, clearly superior from a pollution perspective. Again, in an example of the legislators knowing better than the experts, right? It's like, why would we listen to them in terms of what's the, most of kind of dependable, reliable, affordable power source, when the utilities are the ones who kind of make money selling power? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it is absolutely showing very clear, their priority is protecting coal well before better prices for ratepayers, and well before any sort of acknowledgement or support for reducing climate emissions, despite the crazy weather we're having, despite the Eastern Kentucky floods and floods, and what that does to our communities. So truly, it's just disappointing that coal is kind of getting so much of its way. We don't have any champions in the legislature that are willing to say, hey, wait a minute, let's do what's best for everyone in this Commonwealth, arrow darters included. So that was a story I just wanted to touch base on. Again, both those bills have been passed. Both those bills are on the governor's desk, and both of them have passed with the types of margins that will absolutely be able to overwhelm a veto. So, all right, that's the story I wanted to cover. Anyone want to weigh in on the environment in Kentucky? Something that doesn't seem like it gets brought up that often. It doesn't get brought up often in our show, and doesn't get up at all in the legislature, as far as I can tell.
They did pass a law.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Go ahead. No, go ahead,
Uh,
Chris. Got it.
all right. So I grew up in Martin County, and I don't know if you remember, but about 20 years ago, there was a huge slurry spill. And at the time, I think it was the largest slurry spill in the world. And that was actually just up the holler from where I lived. I saw the devastation that it had. I've seen the kind of pollution that coal companies just let go, and what they have done to the environment. I mean, there's lots of mountaintop removal. I mean, there's a litany of things that they have done to harm the environment, and to continue to let them do that, especially as you know they're clearly being phased out over time, and they're just laxing these regulations simply so they can make more money, because they would have to treat this water, this wastewater, in a way that is that is to where it won't pollute as much, uh, you know, and harm the environment and harm us. I mean, you know, when you think about it, putting all these chemicals and things into the stream, it's not just hurting the life that is in that stream; it is going everywhere else. Um, you know, kids may be playing in that water, and you know, there's all sorts of different consequences that could happen, and it's sad to see that you know, our legislature is continuing to let the coal companies get a pass and harm people and the environment.
The thing I was going to say, it's interesting that in another area, in investing in pensions, the legislators want to pass laws and support that they shouldn't have any ESG investing, socially responsive investing, investing in coal plants that are not good for you and are going to cost more. That just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me.
No, absolutely. But you know, I'm sure, Chris, you know, if the next slurry disaster happens, the Republicans will be on the scene. They'll find some way to blame, you know, Joe Biden. Yeah, and then you'll dig a little bit and you'll see, oh, the regulations were overturned by the Republicans, right? You know, it's like the whole East Palestine, you know, situation with the railroad, you know, the train car derailment, the toxic releases, which just seems horrific. You know, that was the playbook, right? Like Trump showed up with Trump water to say how much he cared, and to blame Joe Biden for what we don't exactly know, but you know, because he didn't run the railroad, and it turns out he wasn't the administration that ratcheted back the safety rules for the railroads, right? So I think you're totally right, though, Chris.
And just another nail in the coffin. Like, I'm sure some coal company CEO will stand up and say something silly, like, "Oh, don't worry about it. There's nothing in that we're releasing that isn't on the periodic table." I swear to you. And as a chemistry teacher, I know how much BS that is, and I swear to you, there was a coal CEO around the time around slurries 20 years ago that stood up and said that to people, a big mass of people. Don't worry about it. It's all just on the periodic table. It's natural.
Absolutely. Along with a few other things that'll kill you. Yeah, I can't wait for, you know, climate to be brought up in the Republican primary debate so that Kelly Craft can defend being a, you know, the wife of a coal mining executive. But of course, that's a joke because no one's going to bring up climate change in the Republican primary. Like, that is not going to be an issue they talk about. It's just, unless it's an applause line at some event, right, making fun of action on climate change, because we have an entire political party, half our political system, and not half in Kentucky, you know, that just disputes it's something that we need to worry about, even as the, you know, the research is growing more clear, the scientific warnings are growing more dire, and the very clear impacts, the weirding of our weather is undeniable. But yeah, why would we care about that when we've got, you know, trans kids to punch down on? So let's move on. We got one more story. Chris, to his credit, tried to find a positive story in this sea of bad news.
Yes. So with all this daunting dread of what's been happening this session, there is a little bit of a bright spot. And is it real? A bipartisan bill that actually is helping some people. Some, yeah. So Democrats and Republicans, they came together, which is rare, and to support a bill that will help rural hospitals here in Kentucky. So I'm going to read you a little bit about the bill. So the bill expands the Medicaid hospital rate improvement program to include outpatient care as well as inpatient care. It will support Kentucky hospitals by boosting Medicaid payment rates for outpatient procedures performed at hospitals. The program allows for the state to draw down federal funds to pay a supplemental Medicaid payment to hospitals. Hospitals pay an assessment to fund the state match. And so Donovan Blackburn, a CEO at Pikeville Medical Center in Eastern Kentucky, called in and called it a life-saving action that will save jobs and services at hospitals. He spoke to this the financial burdens of the hospital in the region, what kind of stuff is happening to the hospital or hospitals around the region with high rates and a lot of patients that have higher needs. So our operation costs are higher, our patients are lower, and our margins oftentimes are even lower. And so while I want to applaud that there's a bipartisan bill to help these hospitals, I also want to point out that these hospitals are for profit, and you know they don't. I don't know the specific financial situation of a lot of these hospitals, but I do know that they're making decisions for shareholders to make money off of sick people. And if they have to cut a nurse on a somewhere, and that hurts the ER or whatever region to make them a little bit more money, to balance things out, they will. Now I want hospitals. I want them to be good and available for everybody and everywhere. And there's nothing wrong with people making money. I just don't want people being price gouged. And I do worry about that. So just a little bit of good news about hospitals in our rural areas getting some support that I know that they need. So yeah, what do you all think about this?
Yeah, I'm still kind of like amazed that Kentucky is a state that expanded Medicare under Obamacare, right? Of course, they did, then they didn't, I think. So it took, I think, Andy Bashir to accept the resources, because again, it's this whole partisan lens to everything, which is just distressing because they being Republicans are just willing to pick fights that have real world kind of human consequences, right? As a poor state, like why in the world would Kentucky reject federal resources to expand healthcare coverage in our state? And that's but that was their agenda, right? So it's but when push comes to shove, right, when it's like, oh, we're going to close these rural hospitals unless we get some support, that's when you do see like these guys are not going to get reelected if they let them close on their watch, right? And I think that is a real threat for a lot of rural communities, is losing their primary kind of healthcare providers. So I'm glad to see that reality, bringing some folks to the table and actually brokering some solutions that'll be useful for our Commonwealth. I don't know, Doug.
Oh yeah, it really is unusual lately over the last 3 or 4 years to have our legislators actually working together to pass something that's good for the Commonwealth. There's been so much time, I don't know, passing bills that are just don't have any place to even be talked about. But coming together, that's really what they should be doing. They should be working bipartisanly to pass good legislation for the people. And that's not been the case in the last several years.
Yeah.
Call me Debbie Downer, okay?
What's that?
I said, call me Debbie Downer.
I do. Yes, it was under Steve Bashir. That's right. So thank you, Betty Weaver, for the real-time fact check. I always appreciate that. All right. So I did want to just check in now with our campaign corner. So we're moving on. We're leaving news of the week, and week it was this week. But we are very excited to bring on somebody who is not weak. Someone who is incredibly strong, incredibly brave, and has done an amazing job of speaking up for trans rights in our Commonwealth recently. So Mason, I'm gonna maybe mess up your last name, Chernosky. Mason Chernosky. So Mason, I feel like I've seen you kind of around the periphery of my activism and organizing, but you were kind of thrust center stage last week, as you were testifying against these kind of hateful omnibus anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ plus bills. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us kind of what's your kind of origin story, and then how are you, how was that process of becoming I'm assuming Commonwealth-wide acknowledged rock star for your organizing?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. My name is Mason. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an LGBTQ advocate. I have been involved with Frankfort a lot this session. I have testified several times in front of several different committees about a bunch of different bills. And also been around Frankfort in general. I spoke about SB 150 when it originally passed through the Senate committee. I spoke about, at that point, it was just allowing parents to essentially opt their kid out of services, as well as allowing teachers to misgender students. So I spoke about the effects that would have on students' mental health. I also was there when House Bill 470, which was the original ban on trans care, passed through the House the first time. I don't know if anybody at home or if any of you all were watching, but if you heard on the KET feed, if you heard people screaming, you probably heard me screaming. For 3.5 hours, I was super fortunate to be part of a community that was just there and present and making our voices heard for 3 hours. It was really incredible. And I think that's been really incredible to be in Frankfort with the group of people I've been with.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, as Nate says in the comments, we do not deserve a rock star like Mason, but so glad that we've got you. So you were there, you yelled. Were you escorted out of the chamber, or did you point to your neighbor like it was them?
So two different things. When it originally passed the House, we were not in the chamber. When it originally passed the House, that was not this Thursday, but I think 3 Thursdays ago. We were not in the House, we were in the rotunda. But they could hear us on the House floor, they could hear us on the Senate floor, and they could hear us outside the rotunda. That's how loud we were, but we were not kicked out of the House floor. When the bill passed last Thursday in the Senate, I was part of the group that was kicked off the Senate floor for yelling. Yes.
At that point, though, Like, what does it matter? You know, if they just pass the horrible bill, like, might as well get the hell out of there. Yeah, so it's, you know, dire straits, right? Like, as you've heard this entire episode, I think, come to it again and again. This is a horrible omnibus package of hate, and we need to stop it. What we will get into this with Representative Keturah Herron in a minute, but, you know, like, what's your take on it? Like, what do we need to do to, like, get the legislators to kind of wake up to the harm that they're creating, or to get the, you know, the constituents to, like, clue in? You know, like, the polling's horrible, right? 71% of, you know, Kentucky voters think this is a bad idea to, you know, kind of get between doctors and their patients in terms of trans gender affirming care. But, like, that doesn't seem to be resonating. What do we got to do here?
That is a great question. I think what a lot of these legislators need is they need to hear from us. I was there in the last week in Frankfort with an incredible activist who I would like to shout out. Her name is Emma Curtis. If you saw my testimony, you also saw hers. She's the one with the blue hair. And we got to speak one-on-one with several different legislators. And we heard a lot from them that they don't know anything about trans people, that they haven't met a trans person before. A lot of them shared that they told me, like, I don't know what name to use, I don't know what pronouns to use, kind of that level of functioning. So I don't think the legislators in Frankfort are aware of the number of trans people that are in Kentucky. So I think having conversations with them, if you are trans or are a friend to a trans person or a grandparent to a trans person, is very important, and sharing with them the joy that being trans brings, I think, is something we didn't hear a lot about, and I think it's a perspective that they should see.
That's a great point, for sure. Doug, any questions for Mason?
I wanted to ask you if you might speak a little bit about Camp Beacon.
Of course. So talking about Trans Joy, which is a perfect transition, there are, our community has always been here, will always be here. It doesn't matter what happens in Frankfort. It does not mean that our community is going away. And I'm working with a group that is dedicated to uplifting that joy. For a lot of kids in Kentucky, they're not able to have safe, affirming spaces where they really feel like they can express who they are. So we are organizing a summer camp experience for kids who identify as LGBTQ to be around other people who affirm their identity and just have a normal summer camp experience free of bullying or harassment or things like that. The camp is going to be in central Kentucky. I'm not sure if you all can still hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Camp Beacon sounds awesome. I know that there's a crew of folks working on it. I think I've been seeing folks like Jess Bowman, helping to create something. But yeah, we would love to share out information. If you've got a link, feel free to put it in the comments. Jess, I see you're watching, and we can share it out on the screen, and we'll absolutely make sure we put it in the show notes so it goes out with our podcast as well. But yeah, it seems awesome. Kids being, safe and secure and having fun. And, the reality of it is, right? Like, gender affirming care saves lives. right? So why wouldn't, kids who don't have to worry at all about being bullied for that, thing, like, yeah, that seems like it, even better, even more of a lifesaver than putting folks in a camp situation that could be bad, so cool. So campbeacon.org, check it out.
What age range for the camp?
Yes, good question. It is 13 to 17.
Awesome. And then I guess, if this bill stays law of the land, then, you probably wouldn't be able to partner with school districts because this would be absolutely outlawed, with that horribly overreaching, hateful bill. So another reason to fight it.
I agree 100% on fighting the bill. I do not believe that anything in this bill would prohibit us as a private organization from having a camp.
No, it's just I said partnering with schools would be difficult, right? Because these are the rules that will then be imposed on I guess public schools. But yeah, and yes, Jess, you should absolutely always find a way to resist the nonsense in Frankfort for sure. But yeah, I do think that it's really exciting to hear a project like this. Is this the first kind of camp of its kind that you guys know of?
Yeah, so it's not the first camp of its kind. There are other LGBTQ-friendly summer camps, but they are not within range for people in Kentucky. There are some in California. There are some in Massachusetts. So if you're a parent looking to send your kid off to summer camp, that's not really a feasible option.
Yep, for sure. That's awesome. Any questions or thoughts from the rest of the peanut gallery here?
Just Mason, thank you for standing up and doing the good work. It's hard. I'm sure it feels like you're really swimming against the tide, and but it'll be worth it. It'll be a long hard fight because they've got their eyes set on y'all for whatever reason. But it's wonderful that you're bringing people together, and that's what is going to allow you and so many others to get through this, and you've got allies in us for sure.
And just know you are appreciated in your efforts.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with, Mason?
Yes. I want to say what I saw in Frankfort more than anything else was love. I saw it from legislators who spoke out for us. I saw it from community members. I saw hundreds of people come out to the Capitol on next to no notice to testify against this bill in the middle of a work day, in the middle of a work week, because that's how much they care about trans people and about trans kids. So I want to say, for anyone at home, for anyone watching this, there are people in Kentucky who care about you. And we've seen people organizing around this issue, to use a cliche, from Paducah to Pikeville. So wherever you are in the Commonwealth, there are trans people or trans allies near you who care about you, who love you. And there is love in Kentucky for trans people.
I'm gonna pick a fight with you right now, Mason. What you just said struck me as not really. That's just not fair. It is not. From Paducah to Pikeville, it's not a cliche. It's the map. Like, come on, it's just the map. Like that.
Yeah.
Look, and I don't have problems. Some cliches I appreciate, but it's just the map. So let's not disparage the width of Kentucky and turn it into it's not a cliche. It's just a wide state.
It's just my favorite phrase to use, from Paducah to Pikeville, because it just rolls off the tongue. So nice. It does.
I am a sucker for cheap alliteration. And I also I marvel at how wide our state is, really. Yes. It's also very shallow. Thank you so much, Mason. Thank you for the work you've done, the work you will do. I also, I don't want to give it away, but I heard that you're going to probably be at the Caravan for Compassion in Lexington, which is happening on Friday. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, super glad to have your collaboration and allyship in this very important fight.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. All right. So now we're going to move
Thanks.
on. We've got our interview with Representative Keturah Herron. I think we do, as long as I can figure out how to actually use the video and roll the thing. And are you doing it or am I doing it, Annabelle? Edition of Kernels of Truth, Representative Keturah Herron, who we talked to a while back, I think when she was running for this seat, which she then won, and now is, I think, in her second session, first complete session, if I remember correctly. So really excited to have Representative Herron with us, to share their perspective on what's been going on in Frankfort. Thank you so much for taking the time during this break before you guys go back to the final 2 days of session. What's your kind of assessment? How has it been so far in that short session?
It's been a lot. I mean, a 30-day session, you hear folks say that we don't want to do a whole lot, but we have done a whole lot, a whole hell of a lot. And so this session has been a very short, very fast-paced. And, we, as we have seen in the media, there's been some very harmful things have come out of this legislative session, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are the first kind of openly out elected representative in the state house. Obviously, there's been a very strong anti-LGBTQ agenda that the conservative elements of the Republican supermajority have pushed. And, what we've seen is that they've had to legislatively cut corners to make sure they can get things through in that short session. And now we're staring at SB 150, which includes, I think, pretty much all the horrible stuff of 140, which we've talked about a number of times on this show. We kind of tracked it, throughout its development, unfortunately. And they brought it back from what we thought was the kind of brink of death. What's your take on being in a body that is so willing to kind of disregard your rights and your kind of concerns as a LGBTQ plus individual?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that there's two different perspectives that I want people to know and understand. I mean, one, we know that the bills are very harmful, and we are afraid. People are afraid that we are going to lose kids, that people are going to commit suicide, that people are just gonna feel hopeless. We also know in some of those pieces of legislation, it basically says that teachers, administrators, and counselors, mental health counselors who are in our schools that we've pushed for, will not be able to talk to young people about their sexual orientation. And the way it's written, it's almost about sex in general. And so this stretches beyond LGBTQ kids. We know that Kentucky is one of the highest ranking numbers of kids who have been abused. And so a lot of times young people are sexually and physically abused in their homes. And so this is not, to me, this goes beyond the LGBTQ community. And so they say that it's for the LGBTQ community, but it's going to stretch further and have some damaging consequences. So those are some of the things that I want people to remember. And I say that because some people don't get or support the LGBTQ community. And we know that Dr. King has said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if we're not standing up for our LGBTQ community and kids, specifically our trans kids, then we are going to continue to see this type of antisocial legislation and policy throughout Kentucky. And the second thing that I want to bring up, and it kind of ties into that, is this is not new. When we look at the historical context, we heard President Nixon at one point and say that they were creating these drug laws for Black people and white hippies because that was a population of people who are anti-war. I want people to understand and think about something. In 2020, we saw racial uprising, not just in Kentucky, but across the nation. And everywhere in the world there was people standing up fighting for justice from police brutality. And in Kentucky, it happened in, I believe, 40 to 50 different communities. We only have a few communities that's like heavily Black. So you're talking about a wide span of people who were intergenerational, multiracial, different genders, different sexualities, who was standing up fighting for justice. So from there, in 2021, we saw anti-protest bills, and then in 2022, and 2021 and 2022, we started to see anti-critical race theory bills, and then last year it was anti-abortion legislation, and now this year is anti-trans. This is the trend that we have seen in our nation over and over and over again, and it's a way, in my opinion, to keep people separated, to keep a population of people continuously having to fight for something or fight against something. And I say that to say that the only way that we're going to win these battles and these fights is that we have to organize statewide. We have to organize in all communities, from Eastern Kentucky to Western Kentucky, to Central Kentucky, to Northern Kentucky. It is going to take us coming together on all issues, not just getting riled up when there's one issue that impacts you as an individual.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's easy to forget that it was not that long ago when these kind of Black Lives Matter protests and rallies were popping up in really far-flung communities, right? So the fact that there was a Somerset rally was, I think, really interesting, and should give us hope, right? Like it should, the fact that they're having to play whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, you're right. They're definitely trying to kind of turn us against one another and try to, give people reasons to be afraid of, who knows, being kind to struggling gay kids. It just seems unfortunate. Is there anything you'd point to in terms of, any hope for this legislation? I mean, obviously, you'll be back 2 days. We are presuming a veto will be kind of forthcoming. I don't know if you have any news on that, but I haven't seen anything. We very much hope the governor vetoes SB 150. And then, of course, there would be, they leave themselves those days to overturn any and all vetoes, because it's just a simple majority. So it shouldn't be hard for them to do that, of things that they prioritize. But yeah, looking at that, what do you kind of expect to happen, or is there anything you would hope, point to in terms of opportunities for hope here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the governor hopefully vetoes. I have not talked to anyone in his administration. I think it would be very smart for him to veto. But also it is an election year, and I think that we have to know and understand what this means. So I think that if he doesn't veto, he is going to have the progressive LGBTQ community who has backed him. He's going to have to answer to that. But then I also think that if he does veto, the other side is going to use that against him.
Oh yeah, the attack ads write themselves for sure.
And so I think that I say that to say I hope that he vetoes, but I say that to say for people that that this is the political landscape that we're in, and because there is a gubernatorial election, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I know there's some fantastic organizing that's happening. There is a youth-led rally that's happening the morning of the 29th there in the Capitol, in front of the one of the buildings there. We'll share that information, absolutely. And then we're doing on Friday afternoon in Lexington. We're hoping to do it kind of statewide, and are putting out an open call for collaboration to do a caravan for compassion. So driving to some of these potentially swingable GOP senators to their homes and offices in their kind of when they're on recess, to let them know that, look, we're watching. We saw your vote to water down 470, which was, I think, a useful step. Wasn't all that we wanted, but it showed some compassion to this community. And I think we should, we need to kind of hold them accountable for, not going along with this hard right, anti-science, anti-medical, anyone who's thought about the treatment of these kids, these very vulnerable kids, and the idea that they would stop them from getting the health care that they need and is the recommended health care is just a horrible thing. And right or left, it just seems like that's not the way Kentucky should be rolling, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that you're correct. This is when we see these types of bills, our people aren't smart enough to come up with this legislation on their own, right? And so this is coming from the national base. This bill was birthed out of Florida. And this is a fun fact that I cannot remember the guy's name, and I wish I did remember his name, but the representative from Florida, he was a senator or representative that first carried that "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida. He inadvertently later was arrested for some fraud. And so, people are hating certain folks because they're threatened, because people, the LGBTQ community is very proud and lives very freely. And you have these other folks who don't. They are lying to themselves about who they are, what they are, and that shows in their legislation. And then it shows in how they're showing up in community. And so, I think that we've seen that here in Kentucky. I think last year or a couple of years before, we had a representative who was arrested for doing some harmful things to his wife. And so I just think that, to me, in my mind, there's always something behind it. Why do you have so much hate for individuals? Especially when you use the Bible. The Bible does not talk about that at all. And so I think that some of these folks and individuals, especially the ones who are caring and really pushing,
I mean, it's a good point that this is not something that came out of Kentucky concerns, right? It's like all the folks who they lined up to testify in support of these horrible bills, they weren't from Kentucky. They didn't have stories of Kentucky's, but everyone who showed up to, testify against all this horrible, hateful stuff, they were Kentucky folks with Kentucky stories about Kentucky communities, right? So I think, that's kind of all you need to know is, like that road show that was coming through, and that these bills are popping up, in every GOP majority, state. They're threatening them, basically. It's very disappointing, absolutely. But, it's just like, if the American Academy of Pediatrics are saying this is the right way to treat kids, like, I'm going to listen to that, whether or not, I'm pro-gay or whatever, like, I'm just, I'm going to listen to the doctors and the experts who say this is how we should be treating these kids. But I do think that we appreciate your leadership. Is there anything you'd point to in terms of like, hey, we actually did some good stuff together, or, what's the session been like?
I mean, there's been a few bright spots in the legislative session. Very few, I will say. There has. Let me say this. There's a bill, very very historical and important bill. There was a bill that Representative Fraser Gordon, she filed this, basically saying that we are going to highlight and acknowledge our Tuskegee Airmen. That was actually a bill. It was a bill. It wasn't like we're gonna do this citation. So I think that's very promising. And I didn't know that there was a man that was from my hometown in Madison County that was a part of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so it was really neat to be able to hear some of those stories, and then for us in Kentucky to actually lift that up. Obviously, we've seen that medical marijuana has some traction. It is in the hopefully it'll be coming to the House in the next 2 days. And then sports betting. I think that those are the two things that we'll see in the last 2 days in the General Assembly. And I think that that's what people in Kentucky are ready for, medical marijuana, and for people to be able to bet on sports as they're already doing. They're just going in Indiana or in Ohio, or for the folks in Western Kentucky, they're going over to Illinois, I assume. So, yeah, I mean, I think that those are a couple of bright spots that we have not gotten all the way over the finish line. But I am hoping the last 2 days that we can get over the finish line.
Gotcha. And I know you've been really passionate about kind of youth criminal justice reform or criminal justice reform generally. What's the status there? Is there something you should point to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this was a hard but good. It's hard to explain the juvenile justice situation. One, I don't believe that we need to be incarcerating people as the first thing. Like that should not be the first thing that we're looking toward. But we know that that the Department of Juvenile Justice has been in trouble, that there has not been a open, consistent facility in Jefferson County since 2019. And when you talk to families and you talk to lawyers, they want their kids back home in Jefferson County. So House Bill 3 did allow for finances and some money, resources to open up a facility here in Jefferson County. I actually voted against that bill, not because I didn't want our kids back, but because total, I think it was $39.9 million that was going to the incarceration of kids and $0 for prevention, intervention, reentry, and alternatives. Also in that bill, it said that it was going to allow juvenile records to be open. That is harmful when you're talking about when kids do come back home. How do we ensure that they have access to jobs and education opportunity? And so I struggled with that. Like, we don't need to have kids' records open. Maybe if it comes to them wanting to purchase a firearm when they turn 18, I get that piece. But just having it open, I didn't agree with that. And then there was another provision in that bill that said it was going to do an automatic 48-hour hold. And it is on kids who commit a crime under the violent crime statute. But our judges are already holding youth based off the data. And what I'm fearful of is that they will then start putting everybody under that 48-hour. Because what happens in practice, because you just have regular people doing the practice, who's doing the work and the paperwork, eventually they're going to be like, oh, we're going to keep this kid for 48 hours. And so that's what I'm afraid of. And so they did change that provision to say that wouldn't start into 2024, which I was like, that's stupid, because if you're not going to do it immediately, then why say you're going to do it in 24? So I'm hoping that this next year we can really look at the data and collect the data and be able to in 24 say, actually, we don't need to do this because it's already happening. So that's what happened in House Bill 3. And then there was Senate Bill 162 or 192. I can't remember the number. But it was Senator Carroll's bill. That was a bill that came out of the working group that was put together, the informal working group. And that bill was a bipartisan bill. I mean, there was definitely some things in it that I didn't like, as they're going to have allow pepper spray and tasers inside facilities for correctional officers or youth workers. I was totally against that. But it did also allow the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, which is a committee that's been around since 2014, to now become the oversight to help to basically tell the legislative body, these are the things that are happening around juvenile justice, and here's legislative priorities and suggestions that you all need to be doing. I think that's smart to really give that group that power and embolden them, because they weren't listened to before, and that's where the experts are. So I did like that portion. In that bill, they put $1.5 million for mental health. Still, that's not enough money. It's a little money. It's not enough money. And so anyway, overall, I did support and vote yes for that bill. But we've got a lot of work to do when it comes to juvenile justice. We're not talking enough about the trauma that kids are facing. We're not talking enough about what it means to, as soon as kids have contact with law enforcement, how are we preparing them to come back in our communities, and how is the community preparing to receive them? These kids are coming back, like, regardless, whether it's 3 months, 2 weeks, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, they're coming back to our communities. And I think that's the mindset that we need to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you for your leadership. Thanks for showing up here and walking us through what you've been working on there. And again, really, really important that you are there in the trenches. I can't imagine that it's a lot of fun necessarily all the time, being a super minority in that body. But we're so glad that you're there to speak the truth to these folks, even if they don't always listen. And then I don't know if you've been communicated with, but I know that the rally, which actually we're recording this Tuesday, the rally is Wednesday the 29th. So the morning of Wednesday the 29th, the youth-led rally. I know that there was chatter about whether you'd be able to attend. So I hope you can make it, because I know you've got a perspective that would really be valuable for these kids to hear for sure.
Absolutely, it is on my calendar, and as long as my vote is not needed at the moment, I will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know things get a little bit crazy at the final hours of a session, but thanks again, and have a great week.
Thank you. It's my honor, and thanks for always lifting up the real issues and having real voices on your all's platform. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, bye.
All right. So that was our interview with Representative Keturah Herron. Fantastic leader. So glad that she's there in Frankfort for sure. I think so we've gone a little bit long. We always try to keep this show to an hour. We've had just an embarrassment of riches. Fantastic folks who are sharing their perspectives with us. But we do want to leave with the call to action that we've kind of already told you about, because we've been laser focused on SB 150, but I want to throw it to Doug to walk us out of here and show us how we should be engaging in this fight.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Yes, we're going to talk about SB 150. We'd like for you all to send a message to Governor Beshear, your representatives, and key Senate leaders, demanding that they reject this hateful legislation. We made it super easy for you. Just click here. We've got a bit.ly link that should be in the chat. Number 2, you can make a phone call to 1-800-372-7181 and leave a message to those wonderful people for my representative and House leaders to vote no on an override veto of SB 150. The third thing you can do is join our Caravan for Compassion in the Lexington area Friday afternoon, 2 days from now. We'll be meeting up at Malibu Jack's parking lot at 3:30 p.m. to decorate our cars. We're printing up "Y'all means all" signs. We'll have window markers. Bring your pride flag and any specific signs. Then we'll caravan to 3 stops. We're going to stop first at Senator Donald Douglas's office. Then we're going to go visit Senator Amanda Mays Bledsoe, followed by heading down to Berea, stopping at Senator Jared Carpenter's office. We're really hoping for 10 cars to really grab attention and to politely inform these senators that they're truly off track with this legislation. You can RSVP to the event and get those details on our Facebook page. The last thing we're talking about is to get to Frankfort on Wednesday, March the 29th. There's a Stop SB 150 event at 9:30 in the morning with a youth-led rally on the steps of the Capitol Annex building. It's going to be something to see. After the rally, folks may stay and pack the main Capitol building with LGBTQ plus supporters as the legislature gavels into session at noon. This rally is being organized by students from various high schools across Kentucky, as well as supportive teachers, parents, and other allies. To RSVP and for details as they develop, there should be a link there in the chat. Sharing some hashtags with you. Hashtag Kentucky GA23. Hashtag Irreplaceable Joy. Hashtag Students for Fairness. Hashtag Students Against SB 150. Hashtag We Say Gay. Hashtag Oppose SB 150. Now for the close. Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State and organized as a 501c4. We are affiliated with the Indivisible Project, the Commonwealth Alliance Voter Engagement, commonly called CAVE, and we're also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Production of episode 105. This is our 105th episode. This evening was by our wonderful Annabelle Nagel. Thank you, Nate, for the theme songs. You can find out more information and music at natosongs.com. If you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook, don't worry. You can rewatch shows and see our source links on Facebook. Our audio podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Logo and some graphic content was provided by Couchfire Media. More information can be found at couchfiremedia.com. Hope to see you next week.